Thank you so much for joining us today at Reframe Club, Wendelien. And would love, we're here inviting you to talk about this amazing book, Surviving the Tsunami of Grief, which I devoured in a day, I have to say. I think even all this time after grief in various guises, it spoke to me. I think it's a very powerful read, but we'll come to that. But before we start, would you like to tell our members a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Okay, thank you, Rose, and thank you for having me. Really love your website and what you're doing. So it's a real honor to be invited. I'm Wendelien. I'm Dutch. And I've married a Scotsman. I've got 3 children, grown up now, but I've always been interested in hearing people, not just listening, but hearing. So it wasn't a surprise that even after my father died, I started looking for, I heard what he said when he was dying, just before he died. And I thought, oh, and that set me on a path. And I ended up volunteering at a hospice, and one thing led to another. Someone said, oh, I think you'll be good for the bereavement team. And I said, oh, what's that? And it sort of started from there. And I did the bereavement training with this hospice. Really enjoyed it. Great team. It's where I met Katrina, my co-author. And then I did a counselling course, because I wanted to learn more, and that path has continued. And I ended up doing counselling training, become accredited, become senior accredited, become a supervisor, but all the while, I think the specialization was palliative and bereavement counselling. It just felt that's where I am at home. I trained later on as a soul midwife with Felicity Warner. Soul midwives are sort of holistically accompanying people when they're dying. Really spoke to me as well. Probably a little bit more the soul part, because I seem to get souls in my counselling room. A lot of experience in a hospice where I volunteered in the daycare center. Then I volunteered on the inpatient unit for many, many years. And I ended up as a trustee for Thames Hospice Care for 6 years. So really saw the hospice in all its aspects and facets. That's really what I've been doing. And I'm still learning. I'm still ongoing with my learning, still doing things. And writing this book has been another immense learning curve.
And what was it that led you to writing this book in particular? Because I think there's a lot on the shelves. There's so many kind of self-help books and guides for surviving, this, that, and other in life. But the way this book is structured is really quite unique, isn't it?
It's really interesting that you've actually picked it up. There are so many books out there that are sort of individual grief stories. We realized that we could design a book according to bereavement counseling sessions. So we could give people sessions in a book. And the reason why was when my father died, many years later, my mum said, gosh, I was so worried at that time that I was getting Alzheimer's. And I looked at her and I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I thought I was going mad, when your father died, and I couldn't concentrate, and, I couldn't even look at a magazine. I couldn't concentrate. I wished there'd been a picture book. A light bulb moment. I started thinking on that, and I thought, we can do something about that. And Katrina, being a colleague in the bereavement team, and we've been friends for a long time, we're in my kitchen and we just started chatting about this. And I said, Katrina, we must be able to do something about this. She instantly got it. She just knew what I meant. And that's how we've worked ever since, like a symbiosis of thoughts, ideas, they keep flowing. And of course, it's taken reams and reams of paper, terribly amateuristic photographs from the internet, but we knew we had something, and then we needed to translate it. And what we worked with is what people told us the most. So my mother said, I think I was going mad. We hear that a lot. Think I was getting Alzheimer's. I couldn't concentrate. We hear that a lot. A lot of people say, I think I'm in a tsunami of grief. And so when Katrina and I started talking about what people say the most, we wrote it down. That's the one that we just looked at each other. And I remember we both high-fived. We knew at that moment we had what we needed to put this book together, we had a metaphor. And the tsunami, of course, is a terrible thing that happens. It's, you know, it's out of your control. But the trajectory of a tsunami really follows what happens in your grief. So you're on a normal beach, it's all normal. Then you see the sea, then there's the death, the volcano underwater, that you know, that happens. That's the death, can be any death. Then the sea recedes, that time that you just think, what's happening? What can I see there? I can't believe this is happening. You're in shock, and then the wave comes, and we've divided that wave in different elements, so practically, socially. What happens to you spiritually? What happens to you emotionally, physically? So we've divided that. Then you find yourself on this desolated beach, just not knowing where to go. Eventually, and then the chapter after that is there's a path. You see just a path. It's still that desolated blackish beach, but there is a path through it. And then it sort of goes to your new normal. You've sort of learned to adapt, maybe. And the book then goes from sort of neutral colored to very dark to lighter. So when people read it, and it's not like a read in one go, you can dip in and out. But somebody told me, which I thought was really lovely, she said, I did look at the end to see what the ending was, but she said, I couldn't sort of, it didn't speak to me what was being said because I didn't feel it, but what held me together was the light. The book became lighter, and so she then realized that that was the hope that was envisaged in the book. So that's really how we set it up in a nutshell.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most impactful things as a reader was actually the illustrations by Ruth Thorpe here. And I also think the fact that it is written, and you know, if it's, I will show this for the readers, it's all written in, these are very short, concise sentences that almost like validations, but they're also in the first person. They become your experience, which allows you to identify, rather than reading a book that is an external voice telling you that it is normal to experience this. I think,
and again, you've picked up on exactly what we've been trying to do. It's recognition, so that you recognize yourself in that the illustrations give you that feel of exactly, this is what it's like. This is what my mother would have wanted to see. Oh, so this is normal. So this is what people feel. This is what other people feel. So I'm not alone. And really, going back to Ruth, finding her has been the biggest gift to this book. And Ruth loved the manuscript and said she cried when she read it. And I know that Katrina and I looked at each other at that moment and thought, we've got the right illustrator, someone who's emotionally able to be open, to be vulnerable, to dare to feel with us, because this is raw stuff. This is not for the faint-hearted. As some of the publishers who we tried to get our book published with said, it's too raw, it's too deathy. And we thought, yeah, we know that. But Ruth went with it. And so she then started, we explained what we wanted. She would come up with illustrations. We would go back to her, and, you know, years of work backwards and forwards. And she captured the illustrations. So it's not personal, you can't identify, but you see something. But that's also because Ruth is very emotionally literate, and yeah, it was great working with her, and she's really translated what we hoped for this book.
I think you can really feel that synergy. You absolutely can. You just made a point there that had me thinking about something you write about in the introduction of the book, when you said you took it to the publishers and some of them said it's too deathy.
Yes.
And actually you make the point that as a culture, as a society here, we don't have the rituals and the language around death that other cultures and social structures do, that somehow can make, you know, in your opinion, does that impact how we grieve, not having that language, those?
Yes, it does. And I think grief went underground. This is not my wisdom. This is what I've picked up from all my expertise or experience rather. that after the First World War, the Second World War, there were just too many deaths in too many families. So then it becomes very difficult to support your neighbor or someone close to you when you are going through it yourself and they are going through something themselves as well. So maybe that's the reason why death or dying and talking about it just went quiet, and people got on with it quietly. It is definitely changing. There's a real sense of people, especially about dying, the end of life doulas, the soul midwives, Dr. Catherine Mannix and her fantastic book With the End in Mind, really beginning to reach people and talking about dying. Grief is still scary. Well, why would you want to be in touch with grief? It is raw, it is painful. People don't know what to say. So they use a lot of metaphors, pushing up the daisies or 6 feet under, they passed away, or the word death is often not mentioned. The name of the person who died is often not mentioned for fear of upsetting someone. But you can't upset them any more than they already are. Life is as raw as it gets for them. You can't make that any worse. You just make it worse by not mentioning their name, by not acknowledging their loss. So yes, the language, I think it's slowly changing, sadly, because of COVID as well. And I don't know if you've noticed, but Katrina and I have Instagrammed this yellow heart. Not our idea. That was the Gompertz family, Becky and Hannah, whose grandmother died of COVID only just, I think, last week. And they said, if we just, all of us, put a yellow heart in our window, we show the rest of the world or the nation that we're thinking of those who are bereaved through COVID. Now, that is a huge step forward. And if you do that yellow heart, for a lot of people, it might be, I can do something, I can make a yellow heart, I can show that I care, but I don't have to, I don't have to sit with it, but I can show that I care. And that gives people a purpose, something to do.
Yeah.
So
it's a safe step forward, isn't it?
Yes,
That feels quite safe, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And
so hence the publishers feeling this is too raw. This we probably started sending it out in manuscripts a couple of years ago, way before COVID, way before we talked about death and dying and grieving. That's really topical now. So it wasn't surprising to Katrina and I that it was not picked up, but we had this vision and a mission, and we knew we could make a difference. So in the end, we self-published, and we've never regretted that. It's a steep learning curve, but it allows us to say how it is.
Yeah, and I think it's huge for me. I'm going to talk very personally. You in here, some of the statements, as it were, the I's, are quite difficult. Someone from the outside may read that and say, how could you possibly think that? But for me, there was, the line, I just want everything to go back to normal for a moment. I just want respite from that, and that recognition, that validation of some of those more difficult emotions, those more difficult thoughts is really important, isn't it? Because otherwise people just they're pushing down.
Yeah. And as you say, that word validation. And for you, that sentence, I want everything to go back to normal. What does that sentence say? What's behind that? I want some respite.
Yeah.
I want this to stop. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Just for a moment. And I think that's the power of this, is that everybody who dips into this will find validation. And that's hugely important.
And validation and recognition means you're not alone. So the idea of this book was to reach all those people who can't access bereavement counselling, bereavement support, and not everybody needs bereavement counselling at all. I think they've done some research. It's about 25 to 30% maybe need it. The rest of us don't. We have maybe very good family, very good friends, good support networks. So counselling is really for people who've got other underlying issues, so that there's something that comes to the fore when the person dies. So you've got a bereavement on the one hand, the vulnerability of that, and previous issues that may have never been talked to, thought about, come to the fore. So bereavement counsellors very much work on two strands, which is a lot of validating, but also helping people understand someone and the loved one who died may have kept something in check for them. But this book, we thought, would reach people in different cultures. You know, some cultures are not allowed to be seen to get support outside of the family. Well, we know they come to us and we might counsel them in the car while they're sitting in the car. So for those families, for people that are isolated, for people who can't afford it, maybe through the libraries who start lending it one day, we hope, people can reach this book and then know they get a professional support through the book, but they don't have to pay a fortune for it. Or people that are lonely, isolated, wouldn't dare to ask for help, would find asking for help shameful. That's who it's written for. That's how we would like to reach out, and they can then see, oh, this is happening. This is what other people have found. Just like you said, just like my mother, they then have a picture book and think, that's exactly how I feel. And again, you come back to validation.
You talk about in the book the how the wave appears. So, you know, and sort of validation is the theme, underlying thread that runs throughout it. But grief is multi-layered, isn't it? We talk about the emotional impact. You talk about how it impacts socially and physically, and we kind of, I don't know, in your experience, do people recognize those physical manifestations and apply them to grief, or is it all such a muddle that it's impossible to unpick at the time?
I think it's such a shock to people what happens when you're grieving that I don't think they correlate it with grief necessarily. They're just too shocked initially to recognize it. When that shock wears off a little bit and the reality begins to really hit home and bite hard, and they feel, you know, various physical symptoms, they worry. A lot of bereaved people go to the GP in the first 2 years. They a lot of visits, because they think there's something wrong with them. And if you have a good GP, that GP will say that's normal, or a good nurse, a practice nurse, they will say what you're going through is normal. That will normalize it. They will help you understand that that's what's happening. But if you never have heard about that, if you are on your own, what happens when you suddenly have, you know, your stomach is constantly upset? What do? You don't know that that's because of grief. Some people, if they've lost a loved one through a certain kind of cancer, it could be bone cancer, it could be, or say, a heart attack, their heart aches, their bones ache, and they don't know why. And that's another thing we recognize. And, you know, I might just say to them, so tell me a bit about your heart that's aching. And by talking, they realize it's not their heart. There's nothing wrong with their heart. It's just aches. And their husband or wife died of a heart attack, and they just think every little thing they feel, I'm getting the same. And you want to hide that maybe from your children. You may not want to burden the neighbors. You may not want to burden anybody else. So what do people do? Hide it, ignore it, don't heed it, don't listen to it, because they just don't know. So it's really helpful to know that, you know, you will have physical symptoms. Grief is hard. It's raw. It shakes you to your core. A lot of when people are grieving, your immune system gets a massive knock, and so people might find themselves with more colds, just generally feeling unwell. And if you just explain to them that that is why, again, validation, recognition, normalization, and you can see their shoulders just drop. Go, oh yes, oh, that's what that is.
And how do you find when a patient comes to you and they are so in the depths, and it's beginning to or has impacted things like sleep and appetite? And I bring that up because obviously the work we do, often the inability to kind of unpick what is emotional hunger or a lack of appetite, how sleep is impacting them physiologically the next day. And that kind of feeds a cycle sometimes of not being able to hold head above the water.
Yeah.
What are your kind of thoughts on that, or how would you support someone to recognize that that's an area that they might need to bring awareness to?
I think, first of all, we notice it, and it's not just I that can notice it, or Katrina, it's anybody who lives with someone who's bereaved or who's a friend of theirs can see. You can see often them withering in front of your eyes. You can see huge dark circles appearing under their eyes. You can see that they either lose weight or they gain weight. You can see physical symptoms. You can often see their face. It's like their skin is looser. It sort of hangs. Over time, that changes again, and it's about, again, giving validation to, you're not sleeping very well. Tell me about it, because how can you sleep when you've never experienced anything like this? And suddenly, when you wake up, most people say, I woke up and for a second I thought everything was back to normal, and then it isn't. And then that sinking feeling, and then they have to get on with the day somehow or other. Sleep is hugely important. Also, and it's interesting that you do a lot around emotion and food, because if you don't eat, which a lot of people don't, they forget that they go to bed with an empty stomach, and then of course you're going to wake up anyway. So sometimes it's about as simple as saying, make sure you have something to eat, some protein. I don't know, this is more your field, of course, before you go to bed, so you don't wake up from being hungry. You might wake up because your brain is just in overdrive, and that's normal, and that will take quite a while, but it will go eventually. So sleep, yes. Physical, you can see it in someone who's grieving. You can, and why should they have normal sleep? It's almost, how can you have normal sleep and normal eating patterns when everything in your life is just gone? All normality is gone, and normality for sleeping and eating is very important, isn't it?
It is, from a physiological point of view and a psychological point of view. They're highly interrelated, aren't they? When our blood sugar is very low and our cortisol is very high, and
yes,
that can feed the cycle of anxiety that then actually presents physically in the body. But equally, and when I work with clients, I say to them, this isn't inherently abnormal. There is nothing wrong with you. This is what you are experiencing now, and be compassionate with yourself. This with the work I do, the people will come to me and they will say, I think I have an emotional eating issue. And actually quite often it's not. It's a manifestation of blood sugar control, other stresses in their lives. And we talk about it's only an issue when it's the only thing you have to rely on in order to manage your emotions. Is food, is either eating or controlling it. Outside of that, then it's, as you say, how can you eat normally or sleep normally when you're experiencing something so extraordinary? I think it's giving people permission to accept that as well, isn't it? And to
yes,
be
and
gentle
I think
with themselves.
What you do is you're asking the questions, aren't you? And I heard the word compassion in there, and that's so powerful, because I think with a lot of there's shame around this as well, also in grief. I should be able to cook. I should be able to sleep. I should be able to do all these things. I'm letting my husband down. I'm letting my wife down by not cooking. She was a brilliant cook, and look what I do. There's a lot of shame in it that we need to unpick as well. So what is it that they're hiding from? And it's about asking those questions, but very gently, with a lot of compassion, because it's already difficult enough for them, isn't it? To find that their eating patterns are disordered, and maybe the way they look, and they let go of themselves, and people say, oh, what's happened to you? And how can they explain what happened to them? It's almost impossible. This body now is grieving. I can't feed it. I can't nourish it because I can't nourish my loved one. So why should I feed myself? They feel self-worth is another huge thing that I've picked up with people who are grieving and not eating. I'm not worth continuing to live because he's dead and I'm not. Why would I want to eat?
Survivor's guilt.
Yes,
Like
yeah, yeah,
survivor's
yeah,
guilt.
yes. Hadn't thought of it like that, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, I can imagine. And but also there's something there about I'm just looking at the correlations that there can sometimes be, in that in um, the sector I work in, where we're fighting against a lot of talk around what is true body acceptance, and in a world that wants you to be and appear a certain way, is that often people will anecdotally talk about either they've been very ill or they have grieved and they've lost a lot of weight, and people have said, wow, you look fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a painful juxtaposition to be presented with. Yeah, and unfortunate.
Yeah, and they'd rather not look fantastic but have their loved one back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So how do you think some of those physical manifestations of that incoming wave manifest? We talked about sleep, we talked about how appetite may increase or decrease. How can someone who perhaps is there now or living with the legacy of grief recognize and be with some of those things?
It's about recognition. Again, we use that word a lot, don't we? But I hope people see it in the book, that they see what it is that they need to read at that moment. If you are with someone, I might notice that, they sit like this, or they do this, or their hands are on their stomachs, and I notice that, and I say, well, what's going on just now? Where are your hands just now? And they say, well, here. And they haven't realized that that's what they're doing. But I've realized that over a few sessions, or you notice where the hands go, you notice the body language, and you notice it's pain, but they haven't recognized it as pain yet. It's just a defense mechanism, maybe, against the onslaught of all these physical aspects of the wave. And it by making that connection between body and mind, by seeing it, by observing it, but very gently, and say, what's that telling you in there? What's happening in your stomach? And then inviting, and everybody is different, and some people can say it very eloquently, very quickly, others can't, and you just help them and say, well, what does it look like? Is it round? Is it square? Has it got a color? Eventually you come to what is sitting in their stomach, what is causing that pain. And then you connect it to the mind. Body and mind are so closely interwoven. But it just needs, and anybody can do that. Anybody can observe someone who's grieving. And if they do the same thing over and over again, just notice and say, what's happening? I notice you're doing this. What's that doing? What's that telling you? And then they get more in touch with their body, and they start looking at, what could that be? And I just didn't say to them, be curious about what you do. Don't judge it. Just be curious. So when you do that again, say, oh, I'm doing it again. Oh, that's back to my stomach. Okay, what's my stomach feeling just now? And then you start integrating those feelings, those physical manifestations that you have with, yes, this is what grieving feels like, or this is what hurting feels like. It hurts. And sitting with it is really difficult, because what do? We get up, we do something, and that's healthy, and movement is incredibly healthy. But before you do that, you just need to become aware, why am I doing this? Why am I touching myself, hugging myself? What's that saying? Where is that pain? They're often pointing at it already, but they haven't seen it themselves. They just need someone else to see it.
And it's very powerful, isn't it? As someone who's supporting someone who's bereaved, recognizing the power of naming it for them, yes, and helping name it for them. because I think we were sort of brought up to distract.
Exactly.
Distraction is our default, isn't it?
Yes.
To distract ourselves or to distract someone. We do it with our children, we do it with, oh, you're fine, have you seen, don't worry about it, let's talk about something else, let's change the subject.
Yes.
And that actually isn't the most supportive thing we can do, is it?
It isn't.
Always.
No. It's okay, because it's difficult for people to do that, to be a little bit vulnerable themselves, because you need to be able to be a bit vulnerable yourself in order to help someone else. You need to, and that's why the sadness for people that are grieving is that often people that they know and have known all their lives are not there to support them, and they go, why is my best friend not turning up? Why are they not calling me? And they feel really bereft, and that's a physical pain. And they say grief rearranges your address book, and it does. But then when I say to people, remember what you've learned, how far you've come, the pain you are experiencing, the pain that you need to go through in order to really acknowledge that was your loved one who died. You've grown through that. You've learned to be a different person, even though you didn't want to. Are you still on the same level with that friend who's not been bereaved, who, you are now on a different level? You are going to meet people who are at that level too, or who are different, who have grown themselves. And it's not to say that your best friend is suddenly never your best friend anymore. You're just not on the same wavelength for a while. May come back into balance. But that is a physical pain, that physical pain of people not being there for you, and finding then the unexpected person who comes with a plate of food, who just puts it in front of you, who feeds you, who takes you out, and you never expected that person to be there. But they see your pain, they see what's going on. We'll all get it one day, we'll all be wise one day, we'll all see it one day. But in the meantime, we can help teach others to see it when it doesn't come natural to everybody.
No, absolutely.
Long-winded answer to your question.
No, not at all. A beautiful answer to the question. And what message of hope would you give those who are currently trying to survive the tsunami of grief, or have found themselves lying exhausted in its wake on the beach? What message of hope would you give people?
I think it's, for me, I often say to people, let me hold the hope for a while. So while you can't see any light at the end of the tunnel, you're in it. Trust that other people do that for you. That there are people along the sidelines you might not see, but they are cheering you on. And sort of help them. Who might those people be that are there if you were to call them? And they can always name one or two immediately. So it's about holding the hope for them. It's not to be false. I don't think I give people hope. I ask them what their hopes are, because how can I give someone who's been bereaved hope? I can hold it. I can give them my experience. I can give them my work, my compassion, but I can't do it for them. I need to elicit it from them. What is meaningful to them? What is important to them? And it can be very different. Somebody may just say, I just want to travel. And we then talk a little bit about that. What would that mean? And then by talking about that, that gives that person the hope that at the moment they couldn't travel, but one day they may. And I still remember one client, and that's just so lovely. She came in and she said, do you know what? I've been up north on the train up north. Well, that sentence I will never forget. I will never forget the moment, the celebration we both had, because that was huge. huge for that person. And we talked for many, many, many months about the possibility of potentially one day in the distant future to go up north to some friends. But she did it. And to celebrate that. And that was building the hope by asking them.
Yes.
Because I think if it comes from me, well, it would be glib, wouldn't it? It'll all be all right. It wouldn't be genuine. It wouldn't be authentic.
It's almost as though I was just envisaging it. And when you said, I thought those words were very beautiful about let me hold it for a while. I had I'm quite a visual person, but almost it's you standing there with a lantern, and it's their path towards a horizon that they can't quite see yet, but your life, you're there is a horizon, and it's bringing their awareness when they feel able to look back up.
Yes.
And one day hand the lantern back to them so they can walk towards it. I think that's a very beautiful analogy.
Yeah, and that's what this book is for. It's specifically also for people that have not been bereaved, even though it won't have the same impact to them. But someone who's been bereaved, which we've already seen that works, has shown it to a teacher, and the teacher goes, oh, so that's where you are. The teacher then recognized where this person is as a younger person. And the teacher realized, so that's where you are. So this is what, and then started reading the rest of the book and thought, my goodness, this pupil of mine is going through, I can't feel it myself, but I can come a little bit closer to knowing how that pupil feels. So it's written for nurses, doctors to also instantly see where someone could be and some of the emotions that come out. So it's structured two-way in so that other people can hold the hope and can see this is where they are and this is what I can do.
Yeah, no, it is an amazing book. I will treasure this. I have books that I pass on, and I have books that stay very much treasured on my shelf, and this will be one of them, and I'm sure I will go on to gift it to other people when needed.
Thank you, Rose.
It's a very beautiful book. Where can people find it? Where can they find more about you and Katrina and Ruth? Where can they find more about your work?
Well, we've got a wonderful website called tsunamiofgrief.com, and we're updating it all the time, and you'll find a bit about us and about the book and where to buy it, and it goes directly to our publisher, ypd.com. That's also in the book. Katrina and I both have websites, katrinatay.com, and mine is whmcounselling.co.uk. It's on the Soul Midwife shop, and of course it's on Amazon. So there are many ways to find it. Many avenues, yes, yeah.
But thank you so much, and more than that, I mean, thank you for coming today, but thank you for the work you do. I think it's very needed and rather wonderful.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And yes, I think what you do is hugely important, and I love the bit on your website that says a well awaits you. I think that's a sentence on your website that I really like, but thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed our chat, Rose. Thank you.
Thank you.